I'm going to call the Planning Commission meeting to order. And good evening, everybody.
Evening. Okay, Rodriguez. Present. Swift.
Here.
Green. Fragoso. Here. Gonzalez-Parber.
Here.
Kierline.
And me, I'm here too.
Sorry. Chair Newton. I was looking right at you, too. Yeah.
All right, so first we'll go to approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes to or a motion to approve the agenda?
I so move if there are no changes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimously approved. Okay, so the chair shall maintain order at the meetings in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order, and the commission has the responsibility to be a model of respectful behavior in order to encourage community participation and citizen input at commission meetings. The commission and the audience are expected to refrain from using profane language and/or ridiculing the character or motive of commission members, staff, or members of the public, and to maintain the standards of tolerance and civility. All right, so we've got that straight. We will now open up the meeting for public comments on non-agenda items. So if anyone is here to talk about something that is not on the agenda, now is your opportunity to do so.
Michael McIntosh. Unfortunately, Phil Green is not here, so I will return next month or at your next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, with no other comments on non-agenda items, we'll close that public comment period and move on to the consent calendar, which we'll skip because there's no consent calendar items. And we'll go to the public hearing items, and the first one we'll hear about is 51 San Gabriel Drive. Linda.
Okay, the applicant's requesting a use permit to construct a 282 square foot office with a half bath above the existing garage. The 282 square foot addition will increase the living space square footage of the residence from 1,611 square feet to 1,893 square feet. And the house has 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. The office over the garage will be accessed by a rear stairway located at the northwest corner of the structure. The proposed residence square footage and number of bedrooms and bathrooms is consistent with other residences on similar sized sites in the Marinda Oaks subdivision. There are also numerous other residents in the Marinda Heights neighborhood with second-story living space over the garage. The one thing that's atypical for the design of the proposed office is that it will not be interconnected with the rest of the house by an internal stairway. So therefore, staff has included in the conditions of approval that prior to issuance of a building permit, the owner must sign and record a deed restriction indicating that the office is for the use of the residents only, and that conversion to an accessory dwelling unit, construction of additional improvements within the space, or use by persons not residing in the main residence will require either a modification of the use permit and/or issuance of a building permit. One other concern of staff is the installation of a standard window in terms of the sill height above the finished floor in the west wall of the second-story addition. That area is adjacent to the side yard of the neighboring residence at 43 San Gabriel. Staff believes the height above the floor of this western window on the second floor, 8 feet from the western side property line, would negatively impact the neighbor's privacy. Therefore, we've added a condition that if there's a window installed in that wall, that it be a clear story window with a minimum height above finished floor of 6 feet. Minimum height above, yeah. And there's also windows facing north, so there's already light getting into this room without a full-sized window in that one wall. Based on our ability to make the findings, we are recommending approval of that you adopt Resolution 2018-12 approving the project, and we just wanted to point out to you that there were a large number of errors in this staff report. which I believe I've corrected them all, and I gave you red-lined staff reports and a resolution. Hopefully I caught them all, but if you see any others, please let me know.
Thank you, Linda. Does anyone here on the commission have questions for staff?
I had a question, just for clarity. There's a window in the attic space and a small window, and I guess I just wanted to confirm that that's part of what would remain the attic space?
Okay, well, when I was out in the field, I did not notice an existing window in the attic, and there's not one showing on the elevation, so I think you should direct that to the applicant.
Okay, will do.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Question about the negative impact to the neighbor. Is there a privacy issue, or is it looking down into their living room or bedroom?
So I was unable to tell in the field what the structure was. It might be a garage. You might have to ask the applicant that. It will look into that the side yard space, though. I mean, I don't know what they use that for. They might just use it as a walkway, but yeah.
Okay, so without any more questions for staff, we can open the public hearing, and I assume the applicant is here. Would you mind coming up to the podium? And I know there's at least a couple commissioners who have questions.
My name's Rob Sutman. I'm from RPS Design. Colin and Kathy came to me this year asking me to do a small project for them. Colin works at home, and right now he's working on his kitchen table, so he wants to move up into a proper office. There's a space above the garage with existing very sturdy flooring that we can build on top of. So we decided to do a small office up there with an external stair. An internal stair would have been prohibited in this instance. It would have affected the household too much and the garage too much. As far as the window on the side, which seems to be the only sticking point, Colin would really like to have that side have light and breeze come through that, have a cross breeze coming through there. If a clear window of the size that we propose is prohibitive to you, we would like to propose a frosted glass or obscured glass, and possibly an awning-style window which doesn't open up to look down onto the property. Colin has already gone and replaced the sewer lateral, so the bathroom up there is not an issue, and he's gone through a lot of effort to prepare for the build. I'm going to let Colin talk to you about what's existing on the neighbors and how it will affect them. So this is Colin Parker.
Hi. So there is an existing window on the west side of the space above our garage. It doesn't look into his backyard. It looks right over the top of his roof, down St. Gabriel Drive. I tried to get hold of Mickey, but he's in Alaska, so I wasn't able to get his comment on the thing from there. But I don't think the proposal overlooks his backyard or would interfere with his rights as a property owner from there. But I'm quite happy to make the change that Rob's suggesting, to either have it at the existing height of that small window that's there, or to have it as frosted glass.
Can, the window that is there now, there is a window, a small window on that side, correct?
Correct.
And is that window then part of what will remain the attic space?
No, that's all going to be office space where that window is. There'll be a small attic at the front of the garage. But from about 4 feet back, I think it's all office space. That existing window will be removed and shifted down towards the rear of that wall. And it'll be a bigger window, is what we're talking about.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I'm sorry. We are going to remove the existing small window and put a larger window towards the back of the space, as you can see on the elevations.
So the small window that is there now, would that window as it is now be in what will remain the attic space? I was just trying.
No.
No, okay,
No.
got it. But that window you would take out?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So I just had a question about it looks like you have a powder room, right? There isn't a shower in there, it's just a
Correct.
powder room?
Yes.
Toilet and lav?
Correct.
Okay. And the new window, the one that we're requesting be changed to a clear story, the way you had it before, was that where the previous window was?
No, it's moved more towards the rear of the structure, towards that corner.
So where was it before?
It was just below the peak, the existing peak.
Oh, kind of in the middle?
Yeah, it was a small window kind of high.
Oh, it was high?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so are you are you okay with a clear story?
We would rather have more light coming in, so he'd like the bigger window.
And it was cross circulation, is that what I heard?
Yeah, yeah.
For
he'd like some
ventilation?
cross circulation and some additional light from that side. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, he'd like the larger window, something that will let some breeze through, and more light from that side.
So Linda, what was your proposal?
Well, let me make sure I'm understanding the type of window they're describing. So you're okay with, it would be a frosted, fixed lower window with a top part that opens for the cross ventilation? Is that what you're talking
Well,
about?
I was thinking the whole window would be an awning window. So it would tip out? Yes, it'd tip out, but you couldn't, you couldn't look down into the neighbors. You could
Yeah,
probably see a little bit in your yard.
I'm okay with it as long as they can't look down into the yard, since the neighbor's not here to really speak for himself. That's fine with me. It accomplishes the same thing.
Okay, so we're talking about leaving the proposed window as is and frosting it for privacy.
And having it be an awning window.
An awning that the hinge is on the
bottom.
bottom.
Hinges on the top.
Oh, hinges on the top.
So it just goes out a little bit from the bottom, and you
Right,
couldn't...
yeah. You couldn't see into the neighbors.
I mean, I'm okay with that.
So you have a stop on it or something?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it'll have a bar that stops it.
Okay. Well, I think I'm okay with that, too.
Through the chair, could someone just clarify what it is you're calling a clear story window?
The windows that are high up in the roof, a lot of times they're like half a semicircle, you know? Right.
I'd like to know if you considered making your office a junior second unit.
I mean, this is purely an office.
Could you get by the microphone?
Sorry, this is purely an office space for me, so I don't make my wife unhappy by working on the kitchen table all of the time. So there's no intention to make that into some other unit that someone could live in.
Well, I understand that you're not intending to do that, and obviously, there's a whole different set of rules that apply if you do. But we do have a affordable housing shortage in Marin County, and junior second units require a minimal amount of utilities to be, eligible as another unit if, down the road, you wanted to turn it into a living space. I realize it's very small. But I'm just curious if that was ever something you even considered or looked into.
I think we talked back in the early time about it, and my wife and I decided that it didn't really fit with the house being our single-family residence. You know, the access requirements, if it became a unit, would be difficult, to say the least. So, you know, the whole purpose was just to provide an office space for me to work from home.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have any questions for the applicant? All right, thank you. And I assume there's nobody else here in the audience who wants to speak, or you're welcome to at this point? All right, thank you. Would you put the mic off by just pushing that little button? And I will close the public hearing portion. Thank you. And I will bring it back to the commission. Anyone want to start?
I'll start. I had the same questions that the chair had in terms of this could lend itself to a junior unit down the road, but I can certainly understand the difficulties of getting, the requirement is for access through the house, or at least at a minimum through the garage into the house, right? Up to the unit?
It just has to have its own separate entrance.
Well, this is a separate entrance.
Yeah. So I believe when they met with Michelle, Michelle did raise the issue with them. And it's just, you know, there would be nothing to stop them down the road if their circumstances change from filing to convert this, but that's just not what they are looking for right now.
No, I understand. However, the current improvements would enable them to administratively make that change down
Yes.
the road without any additional construction, so just something to keep in mind.
Right.
Thank you.
Linda, can you clarify for a junior accessory dwelling unit, it has to have its own separate entrance, but it has to share a common wall with
Well, it has
the
to have
house?
it might not qualify for a junior
Yeah.
second unit, because now I'm thinking it has to have its own separate entrance, but it also has to be internally connected with the rest
Right.
of the house and has to be
With
an
a-
existing bedroom.
With the-
So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, but, you know, they could come in to try to, they can reconfigure their house and make it into a second unit. There's nothing
Right.
stopping anybody in the future now that the state has changed the rules. It's
Okay.
just an administrative permit.
And the reason we're discussing this is not so much to request this of the applicant, but because in the future, it could count toward one of our affordable housing units.
If it were converted.
If it were converted.
To a living
But
space,
that-
to a
okay.
living unit, right,
And it would have to have a shower, at least.
right.
Okay.
And an efficiency kitchen.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
I have no concerns. If other people have questions or comments, otherwise I would make a motion.
I have a comment just on the resolution on that, on item number 22 on the resolution, where it talks about exterior lighting, including landscape lighting should be LED and shall direct downward. So should we get to that point, I would just like to add, because we've done that in other resolutions for other applications, that they're dark sky fixtures.
So are you suggesting we just add that term, dark sky fixtures? Okay.
Because we have that in some, I think that's in at least one of the ones we have, one of the other ones we have today.
Yeah, on number 22, we have the part about directing the light downward.
Right, but it doesn't specify the dark sky fixtures, where we have that in other applications.
No more comments or questions for me, just that I support the project.
Mimi, I have a question of Ben, if I can. Mimi, I have a question of Ben, if I can.
Sure.
Thank you. Or maybe Linda. So just to clarify, the reason why they're having to go through a use permit is because they have a non-conforming lot size? Is that what's happening? So the work plan, does that include modifications to the residential zoning ordinance to address these in future? Because it seems like this could really be a staff-level effort, and in order to reduce costs for the applicant and so on, is this something that are we thinking about including that in our cleanups?
Yes.
I think that's really great.
I
Thank you.
tried to convince everybody that it should not just apply to lot width, but also if the house meets the FAR and meets the
Exactly.
lot coverage and meets the setbacks.
That's right.
If the lot is substandard, or if its width is substandard, it shouldn't have to go through a public hearing. It should be approved at a staff level, but I guess the council is only buying into the lot width part, right? They only want it to be exempt.
That was the specific proposal. However, there's nothing to preclude the Planning Commission from investigating other aspects of, I guess you would say, well, it's not really non-conforming. I mean, it is non-conforming, but just fixing certain things that trigger this use permit before the Planning Commission for consideration for administrative review. Again, we're not necessarily saying no notice, no, internal ministerial. We're simply saying that it wouldn't require the Planning Commission to come here and review the project and conduct a public hearing. So it would speed up projects. They'd take less staff time typically. It would still afford the public notice. And the council was amenable to that concept. I'll get into that discussion when we get into the work program. But that's something for future discussion is, how far do we want to go?
I think, so kind of in that vein, when we were talking about, I do support the application. I think the couple of changes that I was going to recommend is condition number 2, that the color shall match the existing building, just because the plans did not say that. It had building materials that matched, and that looked great. I like the dark sky addition. I believe that condition 23 should give the applicant or the property owner some flexibility. In other words, this is saying, consistent with the staff report, that the property owner shall record a deed restriction indicating that it shall be used for his office. Well, I'm thinking that if we add another portion to that addition that said, or if in future the project is consistent with that ADU ordinance, they go directly to staff. Don't have them come back to us.
Well, they wouldn't come back to us.
But that's not what this is saying. This is saying only unless the use permit is modified. So I'm suggesting.
Well, what I was trying to say there is only if they come, because I was trying to cover things like we've had people take offices that aren't internally connected and rent them to other people from other towns, right? So I was trying to cover everything there and say, if they need to modify their use permit, they'll come back to the Planning Commission, but if it's something that can be handled by a building permit. That's why I said and/or a building permit, but I don't have a problem with adding language about the ADU.
Okay, and then, thank you. And then on 24, if staff is happy with the frosting or the downward awning, so it's not to see into the adjacent property owner. Too bad the guy's not here. If he could just say, I don't really care, but he's not. So I'm happy with the change. Thank you.
I also like those changes. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, if there are no other comments, I move approval of use permit application 18-13.
I second the motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any
So
opposed?
I would vote no, because the way the motion was made and seconded it did not include any of the modifications that I made, not part of that motion, so I would recommend denial.
Can we start over again there, Norma?
Can we adjust the motion to move approval of use permit 1813 with the friendly amendments offered by commissioners?
And by Linda with respect to the dark sky fixtures.
Well,
Shall I
that was
re-summarize them?
one of the commissioners. Commissioner Swift recommended that. But I believe staff may have also made a suggestion, so let's include all of those in there. You did it with regard to the windows.
Can I summarize those into the record, please? So this would be an amending condition number 2 to add with color to match existing building, amending condition 22 to add dark sky fixtures, amending condition 23 to say, or consistent with current ADU ordinance to staff. And then condition 24, we'll just keep the clear story in there to give the property owner as much flexibility, or the designer, glass frosting, awning, so as not to see into adjoining neighbor's yard.
Excellent and clear motion, and I will second that.
Thank you. All in favor once again?
Aye.
Aye.
And that's unanimous. Thank you. There is a 10-day period during which anyone who objects to the Planning Commission's approval of your application can appeal it for $500 payable to the town clerk, but otherwise, you're good to go after 10 days. Thanks. Thank you. Our next item is 64 Cypress Drive, application number 1814. And
Okay.
is this you too, Linda?
Yep. Okay, on August 17th, 2017, the Fairfax Planning Commission approved a use permit to allow the expansion and conversion of the existing barn on this site into an 803-square-foot, two-bedroom, one-bathroom, single-family residence with a 240-square-foot accessory one-car garage. The applicants are now applying to modify the approved project to replace the 240-square-foot garage structure with a 253-square-foot open carport with stucco wall supports and a tile roof that will match the exterior materials of the residence on the adjacent lot that's under the same ownership as the project site. While the carport design is not similar to the barn-style residence under construction at the rear of the property, it will present a complementary design to the residence under common ownership at 68 Cypress Drive and maintain the streetscape of this portion of Cypress Drive. There's a number of houses on Cypress that have the stucco with the Mediterranean roofs, so it's not out of place. The original project approval was by use permit on August 17th, 2017, and condition 7 of the resolution that approved that project requires that any modifications of the originally approved plans require the approval of a modification of the original use permit by the Planning Commission. Therefore, replacing the garage with a carport requires Planning Commission approval. And we don't believe the replacement of the garage with a carport changes any of the findings that we used to approve the original project. It still meets the covered parking requirements that are set forth in the town code. So we're recommending that you approve application 1814 by adopting resolution 2018-13, which sets forth the findings and conditions for the modification of the project.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for staff?
I had a question, and maybe the applicant can answer this. Where does the fencing go? Because right now, there's the fence in front of both properties. So would the carport be fenced behind it?
You should ask the
Okay.
applicant that, what their
okay.
plans
And
are
then-
for that. Yeah.
Okay, and then the other question, statement is on the resolution itself. Item 5 speaks to the garage. Page 3,
Thank you.
yeah.
Oh, yes, thank you. That was one, yes. So it's referred to garage, and that should be replaced with carport.
2 references.
Oh, thank you. I only saw the one. All right. I will make those corrections.
So I was having trouble with this one, so I just want to make sure I understand. So this is the approved set of plans. And so this included the reuse of a barn and this. So the original design of the garage didn't even match in color. Well, no, it did. It did.
The color, yeah, the colors didn't copy very well, so it was going to match. The one didn't come out, I'm not exactly sure why.
So it did match, well, the barn had vertical siding, but the detached building had horizontal siding, but the colors were the same?
Yeah, that's my
But the
recollection.
pitch of the roof was different and all of that?
Right.
Okay, so it never was designed or intended to be complementary in, the way I think about this, and this has been driving me crazy, is that I understand that the adjoining property owner uses both lots. And that she came in for the barn to be reused as a residential property, and then the creation of this garage. Love it. Perfect. And now she wants to move to a carport. I have no problem with that. What I keep getting stuck on is I keep thinking that when you have a lot, all the buildings on that lot should be consistent in design, material, design, and all of that. But I don't think it ever was. So in my mind, maybe it doesn't really matter. It's just I keep getting stuck on that. So I'm in support of the application is the bottom line.
Yeah, what I would say to that is, you know, in cookie cutter subdivisions, that's the case, but in Fairfax, that's really not the case. I mean, there's a lot of properties where none of the structures look the same. And now that you're talking about it, I'm remembering that there was discussion with them over the materials in the garage, but it was going to be a prefab structure. So they were limited as to changes that they could make. It's kind of coming back to me. But now they want to do something completely different.
Right.
Any other
That's-
questions for staff?
Through the chair, not a question, but concurring with Linda on her recollection of the issue with not being able to match the siding, and therefore, I think we selected that there be a color match. But I see that the proposed redesign is in fact more in keeping with the property as we see it from the street. And so I think it will be, blend in better than what was proposed previously.
Okay, I just want questions for staff.
Yes, so this is a clarification question, which I think is in line with what Norma just said. So I'm looking at the photographs, the last page of the 11 by 17s. And in this photograph to the bottom left, there's a white pickup truck. Okay, is that part of the property?
That's the house next door.
Oh, that's the house next door.
And if you'll note, you'll see the little decorative fence feature that's stucco with the tile roof that's
Yeah.
got an arch, and then the wooden fence. This property is further down where the wooden fence is, but it's right now used as one property with the house that you're looking at with the white truck in the driveway.
So, okay.
Well, if you don't have them.
So the carport structure would go where those, it looks like black wrought iron gates are?
No, going the opposite way.
Far right, this way.
Oh,
There will be a new cutout.
okay,
Driveway from there.
okay. So here, so I'm looking at the wrong side of the street. Okay, so what is the existing material for the house, the residence?
The barn,
No,
the existing house is stucco with the
Okay.
Mediterranean-style roof.
okay,
It's the one behind the white
Okay.
car, the white truck.
okay. And so this carport is pretty much going to match the house, so that would be more in line with
It will
what we're
match, yeah.
targeting, which is to have something consistent.
And
So-
the house behind the wrought iron fence has the similar, it's stucco with the,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so this will actually help, and the barn will be the anomaly. Okay. Yes, it's way in the back, so you wouldn't even
behind.
Okay,
see it.
questions, any more questions?
That was a question.
I know, but it gets more into you're agreeing with each other with the question marks at the end. All right, any more questions? Great, so thank you, and we will, is the applicant here? Hi. Yeah, would you please? Hello.
Hello.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
I have two questions. Where would the fence go? So right now, we've got the picket fence. If you do the carport, would the fence go
Behind it.
behind the
Because there'll be
carport
two other
towards the
parking
pool?
space, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And then my other question was why the change from the garage to the carport?
Well, there are two main reasons. One is it would cost infinitely less. And the main reason is that a garage would be a big blocky structure on this really beautiful, light, tree-filled property. And if we had a carport, we could have it match the main house, and then we can also paint the barn so it all holds together. It'll just be so much, it'll be like open-faced, like a sandwich, but it'll have spaces and be just so much prettier. And the architect and our builder have just designed it so it'll look like it came with the house.
Great. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Do you
Thank
want to
you.
say anything else? Okay.
No.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Should I sit back down?
Yeah, would you turn the mic off for us? Thank you. And I assume there's nobody else in the public who wants to get up and talk about this one. All right, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. I am going to get into a bigger discussion of this later on, but I just want to comment on something Michelle and Esther are saying about the similarity of design in Fairfax, because I've been looking at the general plan, trying to come up with objective design review criteria, and one of them, I think, is that things don't necessarily look like everything else, and that we do have funky little quirky things that look very different from everything around them. And if you would come in with a fantasy witches carport, I think it would have been just as viable and acceptable from the standpoint of where Fairfax comes from as something that matches the house in the front. But I just wanted to say that because I think it's something that we have to think about as we come up with objective criteria for our residential areas. Okay, so that was my 2 cents. All right, anybody else with a thought, or are we on lockstep on this one?
I support the applicant on this change.
Will you make that motion?
Sure, okay. so-
Without forgetting the change to the paragraph about the garage and the carport.
Okay. Maybe,
Paragraph 5 at the bottom of page 3.
can you summarize that?
Well, we're changing everywhere in the old resolution where it referred to a garage.
Okay.
And there's 2 references in the draft of the reso that went with the packet in paragraph 5 at the bottom of page 3. We just need to change the word garage to carport.
Okay, so I will move to approve. I guess it's the amendment for application 18-14 with the stated corrections from garage to carport throughout the resolution.
Great.
So I move to approve.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? I think that's unanimous. Thank you. There is a 10-day waiting period during which anyone who objects to the Planning Commission's approval of this application can file an appeal with a $500 fee payable to the town clerk, and otherwise you'll be good to go. So thank you very much. How's everybody doing?
Great, I can't believe we're...
Oh, we'll slow down, but I just, okay. All righty, we are moving on to number 16 Mountain View Road, application 1812. Linda, is this you again?
I'm giving the report, but I did not write it. So, okay, the applicant's requesting approval to install a detached one-story, 115-square-foot, 12-foot 2-inch tall artist studio with minimal electrical improvements and no plumbing. Based on the average slope of the site, the town code requires a minimum area of 34,000 square feet and a minimum width of 146 feet in order for the site to comply with the code. At 6,851 square feet in area with a minimum width of 75 feet, the site does not meet the minimum requirements. Therefore, a conditional use permit is required for any new construction on the site. The project site is quite steep, and the studio has been sited to minimize grading while complementing the residence and the garden area. As discussed in more detail below, the site is trapezoidal in shape, and there are minimal locations for the shed that would not result in grading and the construction of retaining wall elements. There are other properties in town that have similar structures used for similar uses. It's noted that the shed appears to be proposed to have wood shingle siding, and insofar as the property is in a wildland urban interface zone, staff is proposing a condition requiring that the shingles be of cementitious, I can never say that word, material in lieu of wood, non-flammable, flame resistant, right? The project also requires a variance of the combined front and rear and side yard setbacks. So I'll give you a little history lesson. The setbacks in Fairfax and the hillsides used to be much smaller. In the 70s, they decided to increase the setback regulations throughout all their residential zones, and they added a slope ordinance, which resulted in most of their properties being non-conforming with one aspect or another. So this shed is going to meet the minimum setback requirements, but it's very difficult to find a location on the site where it could be placed that would not require excavation and that would meet all the minimums and the combines. So we believe that the location chosen on the site is really the best one for it, where it will have the fewest impacts on neighbors, and we're recommending that you approve application 1812 by adopting resolution 2018-11.
Does anyone have any questions?
I do, thank you. If the setbacks do not change, if they are not, they have non-conforming setbacks. right, due to the zoning code revisions. But if they are not proposing to change the existing non-conforming setbacks, why would a use permit be required? I understand it's required because it's a substandard lot, but would this not be an example of a property that the council has indicated that they would consider administrative approval unless encroachments are required? Was that a clear question?
That was clear, and I'm just...
The challenge is that
Well, I'm finding an error in the staff report. That's kind of has me a little flummoxed because she talks about the variances, but in her table, she's saying that there's no change, but there actually would be a change to the combined front and rear and the combined sides. But she discusses it and, makes the findings for it. So her table's incorrect.
But
Okay.
Linda, just to clarify that this is newly proposed. So
Right.
even if, for example, there were existing structures that had encroachments that matched these, the fact that it's a new structure would require that.
Can you give me the correct different table?
Yes, real quickly, I have to do some math here.
So,
Because
Linda-
it's going to have a combined front and rear setback because of the close proximity of the existing garage to the front property line. It's going to have a combined front and rear setback of only 12 feet, 4 inches, right? The minimum rear setback is 12 feet. Okay, no, wait, I'm sorry. So, yeah, but it looks like they've got 11.5 and 3.5, so that's actually 15 feet. Okay, so I did the wrong math. So they have a rear setback of 15 feet, a front setback of 9, which gives them a combined front and rear setback of 29 feet when the code requires 35 feet. But it's being driven by the existing location of the garage at the front of the site. And this happens on a lot of our properties, right? And then the existing side yard setback, it meets the required combined side yard setbacks.
Can you state again what you said the required combined front and rear setback was?
It's 35 feet.
This says 25 feet.
In her table?
Yep.
Yeah, so we missed that.
Right, so right now, we've got 6 feet, 6 feet, and 25 feet for the required front and rear and combined. And I thought I heard you say 12 feet for the rear.
That's the minimum rear setback, is 12 feet. But what I'm seeing here is there's a little notation, 11.5 plus 3.5, and I'm remembering them saying that it meets the minimum 12-foot rear setback, so the rear setback must be 15 feet from the closest corner of the shed to the rear property line, which is on Manzanita. I think what's making it confusing is this is like a street-to-street lot, It has frontage on a shared roadway easement, and then it backs up to Manzanita.
So one of the things
You want me to
that
come up there?
was confusing is there weren't any story poles to identify where this structure was going to go. So I asked the question as to, and it's in a setback, right? Proposed setback,
Combined front-rear setback.
right? And it didn't have any story poles, so it was very hard to see when you went to the site where the proposed location of this was. And the answer, when I asked the question as to why no story poles, the answer that I got from staff was that at some point, the planning commission in the past required story poles only for 50% remodel projects and for second-story additions. So I think this project would have benefited where we have a proposed structure in a combined setback to identify, where that was going to be, because it was very hard when you kind of walked around Manzanita and in the streets to try and get a sense of where that was going to be or what the potential impact could be.
So just to clarify, your concern was over the location and not the height of the structure?
My concern?
Story poles typically indicate height, but it can also indicate location.
It would be both.
Can I just interject why the Planning Commission decided to make that decision? There was a long discussion about the cost of erecting story poles and how difficult it is to erect them around trees. And so it was not just, it was a considered decision that the Planning Commission made based on not wanting to add additional costs, that the important projects were 50% remodels and second-story additions.
One consideration might be, especially when we're dealing with yard setbacks and not height, would just be to ask applicants to stake corners. That would be something that would be relatively inexpensive. So if that's something the commission would like to see in the future, if there's a consensus by the commission, we could request that.
That would be helpful, and it would have been helpful with the last project as well, because the plans never really indicated where that garage was going.
Any additional questions for staff?
Go ahead. I'll finish after. Oh, okay. So staff report, page 3, mentions other examples of properties with similar structures. Okay, and it mentions in the vicinity and within the town. Now, the addresses that were listed in the staff report weren't what I'd consider in that neighborhood. So were there ones in that neighborhood? That would be my,
So, I consider anything out in the Cascade area, the Cascades, but I was really strapped for time, and there have been probably hundreds of these things approved. I actually did not have time to try to pull files and check for ones on Manzanita, right? But I know that on Manzanita, we have a garage that's been converted to a second unit that I do know of. It's an accessory structure, so that's a similar type of use as living space. I just forgot to look that address up because it just came to me now when we were discussing it.
because I wouldn't, just an aside, this wouldn't be considered the Cascades, but the other question would be, would those also have utilities as well?
Yes.
Do you know?
Most of them do, because they're being converted to living space.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a clarification question. So I'm looking at the photographs and I'm looking at the site plan, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. The studio is closest to the street, so when I'm looking at the photographs, we're standing on the downhill side. Is that correct? And from Manzanita looking up?
Right, and that little excavated level area is where they're planning to put it.
And that's
The lower photos showing it from above.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. And it's a 10 by 10, or, no, it's 10 by 11 and a
point-
half,
Right.
and it's just an open studio, okay. I think that's my question.
Okay, well, Linda, I hate to be difficult, unless somebody else has anything else. I don't see the specific setbacks that are being requested reflected in the resolution anywhere. So I think it's just relying on the application and the staff report for the precise information about what exactly we're granting. So because we need to correct the table, I would like to either reflect the corrected variance numbers in a new paragraph in the resolution, or somehow get them in there.
Let me just make sure I'm reading this correctly.
Maybe while she's doing that, can I ask Ben a question?
You may.
So then when I look at the map, like the aerial map of the area, like on the front of the staff report, it shows that Manzanita is on one portion of the lot, and Mountain View is accessing another portion of the lot. And so are those not roadways but easements? Or I guess the way I think about this is that the shortest lot line adjacent to a road, regardless of building orientation, is the front, and that side setbacks would be opposite. And so those are just easements on the back then? Because it looks like the garage is accessing from an easement that's coming off of Mountain View.
Yeah, it's a shared driveway easement that accesses two or three houses.
So those aren't roads then?
Right.
At the very back?
Right, I
Mountain View
misspoke.
is not a road, although it's shown here as a road.
No,
No, Mountain View is a road, but it's up the hill.
I guess what I'm saying is the definition of front is what? And the definition of side property line is what?
No, I understand what you're saying, but the
Oh.
problem is in Fairfax, we have properties that do not front on public roads, like this one. So their front door faces a shared driveway easement, but it's not a public roadway. But it's still the access to the front door and their garage, so that's the front setback, because their property lines do not touch any kind of a public street.
Yeah, I would further add that it may seem inconsistent, but when you have an existing development and it does take its access from a certain area, obviously there's many examples of really irregularly shaped lots, and usually unless there's a particular reason why you'd want to identify something differently than what the applicant's proposing, you just go with what the sort of the norm is. There might be a couple situations where we'd have to switch it, but that's a rare instance when a property's already developed. Usually you start getting into, well, it's really this street or that street when you have an undeveloped property.
And there's no other real way to look at this, because they're showing a gate with a path on Manzanita, but I mean, you have to have a rope and pull yourself up the hill to get in that way. You cannot access the property that way. The only way to get to it is from this shared roadway off of Manzanita. Off of Mountain View. It's been a long day.
So then you're agreeing with me, and so does that mean that yoga studio is in the rear setback?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that first part because I was doing math. Okay, so I think I have numbers now. It does not require any variance of minimum or combined side yard setbacks, but it does require a variance of the rear setback for a very small corner section of the structure, which will have a half a foot setback. It'll have 11.5 feet when it's required to have 12 feet. So there's a small corner that's in the minimum rear setback, and then it will require a front and rear setback variance because it's going to have a combined front and rear setback of 20.5 feet instead of the required 35 feet.
Can you go over the front setback requirement and then, and the rear setback requirement? Because I know that was
Yeah, so
in error on this, so just do the numbers.
the existing or what's required?
Required as well, and then
So the
proposed.
required front setback for a detached accessory garage is actually 10 feet. And this is a detached garage. So it has 9 feet right now, the existing garage. The minimum rear requirement is for 12 feet, and the existing house maintains a rear setback of, can't see the property line there, of like maybe 17 feet, okay? So right now, it has a combined of 26 feet, so it already doesn't meet the combined front and rear.
And then can you say for the front, rear, and combined what the proposed are, just so I can fill in my squares?
Okay, and the proposed front is still 9. The proposed rear is 11.5. And the combined is 20.5. Let me check my math again. Yes.
We'll make sure that that table makes it into the resolution in final form.
So the combined front and rear is 20.5? Sorry, Linda. I'm confused because with the numbers you guys gave us, I thought under the combined front rear setback column, the required,
She has it wrong. She wrote 15. Oh, I'm looking at.
no, on
Oh.
combined, 25, is that right?
No, it's supposed to be 35.
It's supposed to be 35 combined,
Right,
but they're existing at 26.
that's correct.
And the proposed is 20.
20.5.
20.5.
So
Okay,
you're saying,
I got it.
well, I don't know, because I'm trying to scale it here, and it's really dark in here, so I have my glasses on.
But they're calling out distances, so we
15,
can rely on
16,
that
17 plus
11.5 and
9.
9. I mean, that's what we would normally do.
Yeah, she wrote 19, but the existing garage and house maintain a combined front and rear of 26. So I don't know how she got her numbers.
Is it sufficient to leave it to staff to clarify these numbers in the final resolution for your signature, Mimi, or are we taking issue with the setbacks?
No, I just wanted to make sure I had the numbers correct, and
Yeah,
I
see
think
that-
if we get a corrected table into the final resolution, and, I mean, we can talk about that when we bring it back to staff, I mean, to the commission before we decide what we're doing. So, but let's just make sure there's no other questions for staff.
Because I can, okay.
Okay, I think
But
we're
also the
good.
combined, she's got the combined side as 15 and it's 20. That's what's required is 20. And right now, it's maintaining a minimum side yard setback on one side of 8 feet and on the other side of just 12. For a combined of 16, right? No, 8 and 12, 20. Okay, so right now it meets it, right?
But the proposed with the shed,
Right. But the shed itself is okay. It doesn't, the shed itself is not encroaching in the side yard setbacks.
but the combined,
the combined is the existing house, right? If you take the shed alone, it's not being built into any minimum or combined side yard setback. It maintains a side setback of 6.5 feet on one side where 5 feet's required, and it's a very large setback on the other side.
As a freestanding structure.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to open the public hearing, and are you the applicant? Hi, would you come up to the podium and turn the mic on if you don't mind?
Hi, I'm Clarice.
Hi, Clarice, how are you?
Okay.
Good. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
I have one question. I was just looking at the side elevations for the structure, and you have some, they look like final plans, drawings. It's like the second page. But then I'm looking at, and I'm looking at the axonometric, and then I'm looking at your cross-section, and the windows, I think the windows are different. I think that's what I'm looking at. The windows on the side are different. So I just was wondering which one was right.
Windows on the side are different from, so between what?
Can you use microphone? Yes. So I'm just trying to figure out which drawing reflects the right windows on the side. I think that's what I'm looking at.
Chair, is it okay if I go show the applicant, because her husband drew the drawings and she's just here representing him?
Sure.
My husband's having a medical procedure, so it's me.
Yeah. I just want to know which one is right, and if they're on both, you know, if they're on both sides. Yeah.
So which page was that? I'm gonna explain. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the applicant did his own drawings. He is a painter, and he is going to use this as his studio to paint in. So even though we can't get a hold of him, we're fairly certain that he's going to want the larger square ones shown on the, I don't even know what page this is. The finished look page is what he titled it, not the longer rectangular ones that seem to be shown. Yeah.
And are those windows on both sides?
I believe they're just on one, but I guess I don't know. Hang on a second, let me see.
The other side seems to have a very long window. So I was just wondering, just trying to understand the site, and
Yeah, you're right, so then I'm going to change my answer, because it is shown on the floor plan, a long window.
On the upside, right?
Yeah, there's windows on all the sides.
But the long window is on the upside?
Yeah, there's two smaller windows on the,
Those aren't the doors, are they?
no.
no, the doors are a French door type.
So those are the doors, and here are the two windows, and then there's one long window, and then there's something going on back here. There's something else going on in the back, I can't tell.
No, they all look like windows to me, which would match up with what he's been telling us. You know, he likes to paint by the natural light,
Right.
so.
Right, okay. Well, I mean, that will be up to the engineer to decide how that's going to be built. Ye- Yeah. Well, and it looks like because of the hillside, the one in the back would be high, I think.
Well, it's going to be on a level pad, so what makes you make that statement? You were thinking the hillside was going to slope up along the rear and
Well-
cover part of the wall?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm looking at the drawing that says cross-section drawing, and there's maybe it's just a dimension string. It says 8 feet. I thought that was maybe terrain. I thought it was maybe, it's not a retaining wall. So it's exposed on all 4 sides.
Right, and this is kind of going on an existing pad. If you look at it's not an existing pad, it's an area that's already kind of
Kind of
level and
flat.
landscaped, and he's cleared vegetation off, but if you look at the photographs, which I can't find now, you can kind of see that it's, he's chosen an area where, if you look at the bottom of the bottom
Yeah.
photograph, that area is already kind of level. It's covered with vegetation in this photograph. But
Yeah.
that's where they're planning on putting it.
Okay.
And if you look at the upper one, where it's going to go, there is a nice stand of trees that screens it from the house next door.
Yes.
He thought about putting it on the other side, but the neighbor on the other side had issues with it, so.
So I have a question about, I guess, about practicality in carrying canvas and pallets and things like that up the hill. There seems to be maybe clear access to Manzanita. So
Oh, what?
Am
I'm
I-
sorry?
does your husband plan to gain access to the street through Manzanita through
No.
the back?
No.
So I'm just thinking about the practicality of.
Yeah, can I tell you that we went out and we tried to go around that side, and it is a cliff, and you
Okay.
have to pull yourself up by a telephone
So
pole.
that's-
So
yeah.
I'm not exactly sure why there is a gate there, but
But
you couldn't really access it from that side.
There's no stairs.
Right. Okay, so that's what I was trying to get at. If this was a high, it's.
Going to have to come in from
Yes. Okay, so
the
he's
driveway
going to have to
easement.
come back up the path and up those stairs through, I guess, through the house or through the side.
The side.
Okay, okay. That's what I was just trying to figure out.
Okay.
I have a neighbor that's an artist, and I see him struggling with his
Yeah,
pallets
pallets
and
paints.
container boxes.
You haven't met him, he's a Scotsman. He carries stones for pleasure,
Oh, my gosh.
which is
Okay.
lucky for me because.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, yeah, I was just trying to understand how the artist was going to access the house or the road, But it sounds like he has a plan. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Michelle?
I was just wondering whether you looked at the alternative of having this above the garage.
Wow. Above the garage would be really costly, probably requiring rebuilding the garage and then dealing with our neighbor on that side. This location is the most isolated from impacting the neighbors. There's a lot of space on both sides between us and the neighbors where it is located now. And the neighbor on that side is difficult, the one you're proposing, thinking or asking questions about. So we don't want to go, upset him.
And if I could also add in that
Also, the light.
two-story accessory structures require a variance because the code limits accessory structures to 1 story. So if they wanted to go over the garage, they'd be applying for a variance, another $1,125 fee, and may require foundation upgrades.
Yes.
So aren't we already doing a variance? This is also a variance already?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It's, yeah, but it would be a two-story accessory structure, which the code, I just think that second-story things always seem more difficult in Fairfax and impact neighbors more, because you're going up with the four window, the windows on all sides.
It would be more of an obstruction for, people around. Certainly the people above us on the access road would then have to deal with seeing that building. But where it is now, nobody's going to see it.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Would you turn that microphone off when you
Sure.
leave? Thank you. Seeing no one else here, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Would anyone like to share their thoughts about this application?
I was just going to say that I support the application.
I will point out in the resolution on, page, well, under the, page 2 of the resolution at the bottom, there's a reference to application 1810, I think should be 1812, and the same at the top of the next page. Also, I just want to point out to the applicant, there is a condition that the address numbers for your whole house be changed and made 4 inches tall and internally illuminated. So even though you're building an accessory unit that probably no one can see, this is going to require you to change the numbers on the home. Unless you already have numbers that are 4 inches tall and internally illuminated. Okay, I just want to point it out because it seems kind of odd when it's not an application for the house that the numbers have to change on the house, okay? 4 inches, yeah.
All about visibility in a disaster.
And internally illuminated, so they have a little light so the fire engines can see them. Okay. So,
Can I ask a question of staff? Is this, did we put in here the building materials? Is
the
that in-
contentious shingle is on.
Is that in the resolution?
It is,
All right, thank
on
you.
paragraph 2, and I didn't ask the applicant if they
Yes.
minded that.
Yes, it's condition 2.
So is there a motion?
Are there amendments, changes to the resolution other than changing the number to, in the table? They're adding the table of all the setbacks.
A corrected table.
And changing the application number to 1812, are those the only 2 changes?
Isn't this, didn't you mention the use permit and the combined front rear setback that we had to add? It's not just the combined?
Right, it's the minimum rear for one corner of the shed. like about a half a foot, is going to be 11 feet, 5 feet from the property line instead of the 12 feet.
Where's that, Cindy?
In the action that we're taking.
I'm asking, is it in the resolution somewhere? Are we fixing something in the resolution?
I think we should put the table under the front side, on the first page, right, where you're doing your findings. We can put the table in there and we can clarify, unless you want to do otherwise.
No, I just want to clarify what Cindy was
No, you're
saying,
right.
because I felt like if the table was in there, that was enough, but if there's another reference that
that's
I
fine.
missed. Okay.
Okay. I move approval of application 1812 with amendments proposed by the commission to include addition of the setback table to accurately reflect all the setbacks, front, rear, and combined, and side and combined side, to correct any inconsistencies, and that the table be placed with the findings or immediately after the findings of the resolution. And additionally, that throughout the resolution, the application number be corrected to 18-12.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye. And I don't think the application meets the findings for a variance. I think we are granting a special privilege.
All right, with that,
Well, since you made that comment, could you clarify why?
Because the type of use is not necessary for residential property or for the use of the property. I don't think that the type of use that's proposed is necessary for the occupation of a single-family residence. So therefore, it's not a necessity to grant a variance. And so therefore, I don't think it meets the finding for a variance.
okay, thank you, Michelle, and the application is approved with the approval of all of the commissioners except Commissioner Rodriguez, and there is a 10-day period during which anyone who wishes to appeal the commission's decision with respect to this application can file an appeal and pay a $500 fee to the town clerk, and otherwise, if no such appeal is filed, you will be good to go after 10 days. So, thank you.
Chair, can we have a break?
Yeah, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll convene in 8:30. Okay, so that was a 10-minute break, and I said 5 minutes, but
I was here.
thank you, Cindy. All right, so now we're moving on to the Director of Planning and Building Services report to the Planning Commission.
Yes, actually, we're discussing the work program priorities for this fiscal year, and reporting back that, as long anticipated, the town council did provide direction to the Planning Commission and staff at their August 1st meeting. I will say there's been a slate of meetings, the town council, owing mainly to the cannabis discussion, which I'll get into in a little bit, have been literally burning the midnight oil at these meetings, and they've been coming back to back with the planning commission. So it's been exciting, including last night after midnight, but I digress. In any event, the Fairfax General Plan, as you know, listed 319 programs, and the Planning Commission and staff spent several months reviewing that and prioritizing it and organizing them, and came up with more or less their top 10, and then proposed that to the town council. In addition, there have always been 4 major work program items which the commission and staff have been facing. Those are listed as the Marinda Heights subdivision of the Wall property, cannabis regulations, the response to the state housing regulations, and the council's directed work on maximum house size. As will be discussed in the director's report, the maximum house size is going to go to the town council without further discussion unless the commission changes their mind. But the other items, I can say last night that the council did turn around the discussion on cannabis regulations. It was a 5.5-hour meeting. It's their 4th meeting on the topic in 30 days. And they've put a lot of effort into coming up with very good direction to staff and the Planning Commission on the directions. They specifically eliminated several items from consideration. Specifically, they do not feel that the following uses or businesses are not, they feel that the type of businesses are not compatible in Fairfax: manufacturing, laboratory testing, distribution, and commercial cultivation. They also actually added micro businesses.
Can you hold on just a second, Ben?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you repeat those for me?
Yes. The ones that they eliminated from consideration, from further consideration for allowance in Fairfax are manufacturing, testing laboratories, distribution businesses, and commercial cannabis cultivation, and finally, micro businesses, and which has been pointed out as a misnomer because a micro business would entail 3 of the 4 prior uses on the premises, and so it's not really that small, but that's just whatever the state. And those, by the way, are the state's categories. They've also created some subcategories within the major categories, and you can really, there's over 10 types of commercial cultivation, for example, but fortunately we're spared from the need to consider those, at least for the time being. In terms of their discussion about the cannabis, I don't want to go into it in a lot of detail, but I will say that youth concerns were a prominent discussion item, and that there seemed to be a general consensus that the black market interdiction approach, which is kind of what we had till Prop 64 and before that MACRSA were passed, has been a failure, and that in Fairfax certain types of businesses may be acceptable. The majority of the council was open to consideration of adult dispensaries, and that there is some diversity of opinion. At least 2 of the council members were not in favor or wanted further town council discussion, but I think the general thrust of the council was that it's time for the Planning Commission to move forward with their evaluation. So that's one of the big items late breaking as of midnight last night.
Excuse me, Ben, through the chair, could you just clarify what you mean by commercial business?
Yes.
As opposed to a dispensary? Is a dispensary not a commercial business? An adult dispensary?
Right.
Recreation?
These are all commercial businesses. The one aspect that they did also covered was cultivation, non-commercial cultivation, i.e. Growing in somebody's private property for non-commercial purposes. And so that's something else that they are willing to consider. So these are all, as they describe it, 20,000-foot general direction items, and we will be providing your commission with detailed analysis of their direction and topics for discussion. It is noted that some things are simply reflecting, much as what the commission is going to be proposing to the council, a diversity of opinion and options for consideration. Some of these will be options, specifically the recreational, the adult recreation, commercial business. There's a wide diversity of viewpoints, and also delivery businesses. So it's a very meaty topic. And
I'm sorry, delivery on the yes or the no side?
well, delivery on the consideration, you cannot prevent delivery into your town. Under state law, they prescribed, whatever the word is, you can, but a business-based, correct. Or it could be an adjunct to an existing business. Another aspect that they had a diversity of opinion on regarded buffers. Under the state, right now, if a local jurisdiction takes no action, the state characterizes 3 different types of youth-oriented activities as requiring a 600-foot buffer for locating any cannabis business from it. It's somewhat similar to what they require for tobacco businesses, frankly. But in passing the state regulations, what they said was that local jurisdictions can take action to include businesses within that buffer zone. So it's a default buffer that can be adjusted by local action. And this was something that the council didn't come to a consensus on. However, there was a feeling among some parties that allowing businesses that are subject to other types of effective barriers might be acceptable in less than the 600-foot, full 600-foot buffer. The challenge with the 600-foot buffer is that when you start applying 600-foot buffer around the youth center, in the schools and things like that, you end up with a very, very limited area. So this is simply something for the commission to consider. It wasn't direction per se. So as I said, this will be one of the major items that we take forward. As we know, there's a business in town that is very anxious to be allowed to consider alternatives to its current business model, and we will get into that. Beyond that, Marinda Heights subdivision, the applicant is ready to resubmit. Staff has been having a series of conversations with the applicant. He is attempting to respond to the multi-page project status / incomplete letter, which was written to him in March on his earlier application. Staff has every reason to believe that we will be into a full review of that before the end of the year. Maximum house size, as I stated, is going to be going to the town council likely at their September meeting, at the latest in October. And then finally, we come to probably the elephant in the room, a response to the state's housing regulations. And as your commission has probably been following, the state has taken a number of significant actions, both with the Senate Bill 35 and the Housing Accountability Act, wherein, and I'll quote from the purpose of these 2 regulations, the express goal of, quote, effectively curbing the capability of local governments to deny, reduce the density of, or render infeasible housing development projects. So this is pretty astonishing, the state taking such a strong view in support of housing development. As we know, a lot of this is precipitated by a really serious housing crisis, not only in the Bay Area, but indeed in much of the coastal zones in California. And that's some of the motivation. I'm not sure what the entire motivation is, because it's been observed by many parties that a lot of what the state is requiring will actually result in less affordable housing. That the way they've set up the state laws now, that if you don't comply, for example, with all of your housing development target goals, you only, if you're a developer, you only need minimal affordability requirements, or in some cases none at all. So it's not really about affordable housing, it's just about housing. In any event, the two statutes that I mentioned mandate that local government development review decisions to deny or reduce the density of proposed housing development must be based on, quote, objective development standards. And this is another major change in how most local jurisdictions have done business. And for example, the Fairfax Municipal Code, the zoning chapter, is replete with design review standards or variance standards or hillside development standards. And these are the type of things that talk about views and privacy, et cetera, et cetera. Very little in the way of what could be considered objective development standards. So when we're looking at evaluating larger development projects, and again, these don't come along very often, but they do come along, and of course, Marinda Heights would be an example of that. It makes it very difficult to take any action. Well, first of all, it's very difficult to deny those type of applications, but it's even very difficult to reduce the density of those applications if you don't have objective development standards. So the council has recognized this, and of course your commission has discussed this. We now have the firm direction from the council that this is the #1 priority for the work program, which is to try to put together objective development standards. And I will introduce our intern, Chip Decker, in greater detail, but I just want to point out that he has been obtaining, to the extent possible, ordinances and regulations that other jurisdictions have been putting together. In many ways, this is a very new model for development review. I could tell you in conversations with other planning directors and in going to conferences, everybody's struggling with this, because assigning numerical standards, it has to be understood by somebody of average intelligence. I mean, this is written into the legislation. So it makes it really difficult in some instances, for example, in vacant hillside parcels, to apply a numerical standard to many aspects of development review, for example, grading, or tree removal, or runoff. It's more conducive to urban development, where you can apply form-based standards, which are more amenable in terms of setbacks, height limits, articulation, landscaping, fenestration. You can go through form-based design and kind of assign standards to that, and we of course intend to do that. But it's much more difficult, and everybody's struggling with that. Nonetheless, that's the challenge with which we are faced and must face in order to protect much of what we hold valuable in this community. So the recommendation from staff is to assign as the highest priority to this work program, and indeed the direction from the council, the development of these objective development standards. I've reached out to the planning department in San Anselmo. They're in much the same boat. They want to collaborate in developing that. As I said, Chip has assembled some of the regulations that are available out there. He's even attempted to contact the various state housing entities as part of the state government, and let's just say that they're struggling with it too. They haven't really provided, I think, Chip, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've said that they are working on some sort of pamphlet or handout to provide some assistance. So, again, that's their express charge, is to assist local governments in these type of things. They're still working on it. So,
Excuse me, Ben?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to speak to Cassidy yet? Because I ran into her recently, and she said she was kind of ready to go, but was waiting for some direction. And
Yes.
I think, or at least Barbara Kohler has indicated that we don't require council approval for that.
well, this gets into another aspect, which is that with the recent departure of our half-time assistant planner, 20 hours a week of staff resources have been lost. And it's not to make an excuse, you go with what you have, but it makes it much, much more difficult. I mean, one of the challenges Linda faces is, as somebody with decades of experience in Fairfax, I can say on a daily basis, she is requested/directed to assist on areas with which she is very knowledgeable and competent and helpful, but which take her away from much of her normal planning, what would be termed planning duties. And Michelle Levinson, the former assistant planner, was available to answer questions at the counter and do much of the day-to-day planning duties that we also have to do and is really our primary scope. But at the same time, you remove that 20 hours and our jobs get much more difficult. So,
By the way, you guys have done a tremendous job in training her. She turned into an excellent full planner.
yeah, the county of Marin thought so too. Darn. But looping back to your question, to the extent possible, the consideration of historic character in the downtown area would, in staff's view, and I believe the commission has also indicated the same, be very conducive and complementary to an effort to define those character-defining features in objective standards. So we simply haven't had a chance to loop back with Cassidy yet, but
Can we hold off questions till we finish the report? Thanks.
yeah. So that's, the recommendation would be the objective development standards, and specifically, and if you, this is on page 2, evaluate Fairfax zoning districts that permit housing, determine what objective development and design standards exist, and develop and adopt additional objective development and design standards to augment and replace subjective criteria and priorities where feasible. And this gets into the design review aspect of these structures. Moving further along, other aspects that were recommended by your commission and directed by the council include consideration of a no net loss in housing units. This is also something that the state is very interested in. So we'll have to look at how we can accommodate that into our overall work program. But I think we all agree that we don't want to be going backwards with housing units, and this has occurred in the past. So that'll be something that we're going to look at, and we would compare the recommendation is to compare future development applications to the housing element inventory of identified local development sites. So that's really where it gets into the regulations that say, hey, here's your regional housing needs assessment number. We think that, in our housing element, we had to identify locations, for example, the Mandarin Garden site for housing units. So if somebody were to come in with a development application, we would definitely want to say, this is identified as a housing receiver site, and prioritize that type of development versus other developments. Or in instances where sites have existing housing, and that site, I believe, has 2 units. Other sites that have been identified as housing receiver sites also have units, so we would want to make sure that we didn't have a no net loss of those units. Another aspect is the state, in their wisdom, has dictated that we provide expedited project application review, and we're supposed to come up within a very short period of time after a project is deemed complete, whether or not it is consistent with the aforementioned objective development standards. As noted, we in many cases do not have such development standards, so that's going to be a pretty quick consistency review. And so the recommendation from staff is, following development of those objective development standards, develop a compliance review process and checklist, and including substantive and procedural requirements for an application submittal to determine application completeness and regulatory compliance. So basically following along with what the state is saying we are allowed to do and indeed must do in some fashion. The last one, housing reporting requirements, that's really more of a rant than anything else. There isn't a week that goes by that we don't get hit with another request. The last one I saw was a request to go back to 2010 and look at some housing statistics from 2010. What this has to do with development of housing going forward or our current things is a little bit difficult to see, but nonetheless, it's a burden, again, that we're all faced with, as you might expect with something that's driven by Sacramento. They want paperwork, so we're providing that as best we can. And with the turnover in directors, I think there was a little bit of a hiatus in some of that reporting, and we're pretty much caught up now. But that will be an ongoing burden. The recommendation is, to the extent that there can be any collaboration or influence towards providing that type of ongoing reporting, work with other jurisdictions. And we are, in fact, the directors and the planning departments are trying to work together to provide that information. And some of the departments, for example, San Rafael and the county to a certain extent, have been very helpful in assembling that information in a format that is acceptable to the state or the regional housing agencies that the state has delegated responsibility for housing this and housing that. Other general plan programs, there were 10 of those, and as Commissioner Fregoso referred to, the staff believes that the historical character analysis would be helpful and directly on point. It will have to be constituted a certain way to really provide the type of input that I think we'll be looking for, but I will be contacting Ms. DeBaker very shortly and starting to put that together. So we'll work on that. Other aspects, no net loss, we'll attempt to do that as we have the ability to do so. Density bonuses, a good idea. Part of what the state is trying to do with developers is to increase the probability that a proposal will be approved. And one of the ways that a community can help itself and help developers to get there is to say, this is what we like, this is what we don't like. And that's, in essence, what you're partially doing with density bonus standards, is providing a list of more acceptable to less acceptable standards, insofar as the state's saying we have to do it anyway. And in some cases, they've taken away parking requirements. It's a good idea to develop those. I'm not sure if we're going to be doing that front and center at this time, given the other priorities. There are some other housing-related potential work program tasks. One of these is to develop an inclusionary housing ordinance. Developments don't come along very often, but when they do, it would be a real good idea to say, hey, we're going to require X% of that development be actually affordable for people besides the 1%ers, which, not as a pejorative term, but the reality is that if you look at the cost of developing housing, the cost of lots, what market rate housing is being built these days is for upper tier economic individuals. So the idea is to somehow provide the opportunity with your housing regulations to say, hey, this is going to be affordable. And it'll be some percentage of an overall subdivision. The state recently passed legislation which reinstates the ability to include affordability requirements for rental units, so multifamily development. So that would also be part of that. There's probably things that we could do sooner rather than later with fairly modest scale inclusionary requirements. I mean, you know, when you're talking about numbers and percentages, you can start to say, hey, it's going to be 15% or 20%. Interestingly, the state, again, has jumped into this arena and said that above a certain percentage, and the percent eludes me, I believe it's either 15 or 20%, you may have to do a feasibility analysis to make sure it doesn't adversely impact the feasibility of that development going through. So again, this is one of these requirements where you're like, okay, that's really going to help affordable housing. Although I suppose somebody could argue that housing versus no housing, housing would win. So in the midst of all these work programs, and again, there's really just 4 major ones, and the objective development standards is the only one that I suppose you could say is discretionary. The rest are coming at us no matter what. The Planning Commission recommended, at staff's suggestion, and frankly the Commission already had their list of recommended zoning amendments, they recommended to the Council that they consider a number of amendments to clarify and streamline our zoning ordinance. And you know, your Commission scarcely goes through a meeting where the question isn't asked, why are we looking at this? You know, whether it's a 50 square foot addition or some arcane combined setback or something like that. And what we have here are the 6 items which the Town Council felt comfortable recommending that staff and the Commission pursue further. And some of these will be very helpful. For example, just getting incomplete applications out of the office. Some of these have been incomplete for a decade or more. So as soon as we can get the staff resources to begin to consider those zoning amendments, we'll be bringing that to your Commission for code language. So that's a summary of what the anticipated work program is. Likely any number of these items will not be completed by the next fiscal year. What we will probably do is break the larger tasks into smaller, more manageable ones so that we can measure our work progress as we go forward. And I'm ready to answer questions.
Norma?
I don't have one right this moment.
Okay. Anybody else?
So I have questions on this. What I listened to the council meeting, what I heard them say was, get Cassidy started on the inventory, the density bonus ordinance. They like the discretionary permit approval timeframes. The objective standards, a question I had on objective standards is, are we researching the League of California Cities and going out that far for information or to see what, it's a great resource to see what other communities are doing or information that they would have. Because as you said, everybody is facing the same issue. You also had talked at that council meeting about the tree committee and the issue about approving projects here and then not having the tree committee input. And I think what I heard was the comment that we're going to send applications to the tree committee like we send them to other outside agencies. So my question was, how do you foresee that working when somebody comes in with an application? If it has anything that addresses trees, would you then send it to the tree committee and have them provide comments? Or had you thought that far into how that process would work? And those are the only questions I had related to the priorities.
Going through those, yes, I mean, some of those are more things to work on. The density bonuses, working with Cassidy. So obviously that's part of the work program. In terms of objective development standards and LOCC information, we of course were all at the conference earlier in this year, and there's a relative dearth of information. I don't recall if there was a specific topic. I don't think there was. Dealing with that, we could certainly check. Chip has been calling jurisdictions, and he worked with the state, was going through the state, and also there were certain contacts that we had that were aware of other jurisdictions that adopted it. But we can loop back with the league and see if they have information at this time. In terms of the tree committee, yes. That was something, one of the 6 items that the council was supportive, with the proviso that the tree committee would be in the loop on applications that involve trees. And the thinking on that is to use the tree committee as a resource, much like we use the fire department and other commenting agencies, MMWD, et cetera, where when we're transmitting an application, a discretionary application out, we would include the tree committee as in the transmittal list. And so they would typically have a meeting available prior to even project completeness, but certainly before an application were scheduled before the commission to comment on applications. And we would have the benefit of their input on those applications. Now, as a practical matter, I intend to get the town arborist before your commission to provide some additional training so you can kind of pick up the mantle of some of those. I mean, the reality is that when you're looking at a project that involves development in any proximity to trees, you're making decisions about those trees. And this has been one of the things that members of the tree committee have observed, is that, you know, by the time they get the application, the real decisions have occurred, unless they're prepared to say, oh no, you can't build that house like that, which puts them in a very awkward position, and as a practical matter, they don't do that. So the idea is they're given that opportunity to comment. The commission gets the opportunity to review their comments and integrate that into their analysis, as does staff. And that the commission will also have some additional training with which to evaluate the tree removals, which they would, under revised ordinance language, now be given the responsibility for deciding.
Michelle, do you have any questions for staff? Esther? Norma? No? All right. So I have quite a few. Actually, before I launch into my quite a few, Cindy, you said that you don't have any more questions relating to the work program?
Correct, but we're going to get into commissioner comments later on, so a lot of my questions can fall under that, unless you want to cover everything now. But a lot of them can fall under that.
Well, I was going to talk about the report and my thoughts about the report, and if you all feel like you want to respond now, it doesn't really, it seems like kind of a formatting, whether it's here or 2 minutes after we finish talking here when we get into comments. So,
Well, some of my comments that I'll have are separate from that report, having to do with the priorities. So, you know, I want to touch upon Victory Village and some other things. So unless you want me to do them all within this framework, I mean, now.
I was going to comment part of my comments were, Ben, there were quite a few issues that we were going to follow up on, and I would really appreciate hearing from you during your reports about the things that we said we were going to follow up on. And so I'm going to go through what I think they are.
Well, okay. That's fine. I did look at the minutes, and I'm aware that Victory Village was one of the items, and that Caterpillar Academy was another one. So I was going to,
And there's 3 more.
okay. Okay.
Okay, so number 1, I would like an update on Victory Village. Number 2, I would like an update on the Caterpillar Academy. Number 3, I would like an update on the question of the definition of floor space when referring to accessory dwelling units. Number 4, I would like an update on the parkade rehabilitation. And number 5, I would like an update on the outdoor music at Mas Masa.
Okay. In terms of Victory Village, we are processing 2 things right now, building plans and the final, or the parcel map for finalizing the subdivision. So we have Coastland acting as town engineer, and they are conducting that work. Staff is working with both the RCD, the applicants for Victory Village, and Coastland in this process. And the anticipation will be the parcel map will be scheduled before the town council, either at their October or November meeting. So there was a question about open space. They are currently proposing a 150-foot wide band of open space across the top of the property, so which is considerably larger than the strip which staff was able to locate on one of the plans. We're getting a determination on what the open space actually means. You know, they have to talk to their people and clarify what their position is. Staff's position is we would like that to be publicly accessible open space, not just permanent, private, non-accessible open space. Caterpillar Academy has a
Could I ask a question on that? So I went back and looked on what the discussion was on that. So back at the April 2017 Planning Commission meeting, what the plan had been there was applicant proposes to meet their subdivision requirement by dedicating at least 0.32 acres to the town for parkland. And that would be a 10-foot wide strip of land at the back of lots 2 and 3. And per Sean Kenning, this area would be deeded to the town. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of the stuff that I went back and found. And that would be shown on the final subdivision map. And then the question was whether that it had been discussed as being deed restricted versus dedicated land, and the town attorney stated that the final detail would be worked out by the council. The difference between the 2 options is that the deed restriction would show up on the title and state that this area is for the sole use of parkland, etc., while a dedication would transfer fee title to the town. And that, I think, a question we had before is what were the 3 density bonuses. So what that was covered parking, height, and then the undergrounding of the utilities was the 3rd one that came out of that.
I'm sorry, what were the 3?
Covered parking, height, and undergrounding the utilities.
And so that second one would be a substantial deviation from the project as approved by the Planning Commission if they were not providing it, unless the ordinance for parks enables them to pay an in lieu fee in lieu of that.
They did some
No, I think that was, the in lieu fee was either, well, in lieu of providing the space, and their proposal was to provide the actual .32 acres versus paying the in lieu at that point in time.
So then what staff would be looking for is a notes in the minutes, or that the council enabled a waiver of that fee. Because either they've got to provide it because they got the height, right? They got the height exception. That's what the design plans are going to include, right?
And they did the underground utilities, and they did provide part plans.
Right. So the council could say, okay, we're going to waive that. Well, I think that's what you're looking for, is the council determination that they waived this requirement.
No, I think
No.
this was all, we just want to make sure, see, part of this was that after this, they were looking at the May 2017 Town Council meeting. The report was that the applicant had submitted a grant application to Marin County, to MCF, to support the project, and if it was successful, then they would be donating those 2 parcels in the back for open space to the town. So what I'm just trying to do is going back to those original 30.32 acres to see where we are on that, to make sure that we get that out of that, because we're not going to get the 2 parcels.
Yes.
Right, because the parcels were not a part of the density bonus agreement. There is a specific density bonus agreement that was recorded with the entitlements for this project that we should pull out and take a look at.
Well, and that's in fact where,
Answers in these questions of what was required.
right, that's where the strip was shown. I could say this, that the 150-foot wide strip is significantly in excess of the .32 acre 10-foot wide strip. So I think we could probably close the loop in terms of the public dedication or deed restriction. I'm not sure we necessarily want to dedicate dedicated land, but certainly accessible if at some point in the future there were the ability to access that. There were conversations with the applicant about trying to run access out to Sir Francis Drake, but that didn't yield anything. So basically what they're proposing right now is far in excess of what the town required in terms of that .32 acre.
Do they have to come back to us for approval of this, or what are you saying, the town council has to approve it?
The town council, under Fairfax Muni Code, the town council has to approve a final map, so.
Do we have any role in continuing on this project, or are we done, or what
You're
are you
done.
saying?
You're done, and in fact, this is the first jurisdiction I'm familiar with where the council has any role in approving a final map. Typically, a final map is a technical compliance review. So, but be as that may, the town council, does have to go through the town council for final sign-off.
And so any recommendations that we might have to the council about ensuring public access to that open space in their approval would be based on, like, them listening to what I'm saying right now?
More or less, yes. You do not have any kind of official role in this project going forward, unless they were requesting a change on some aspect of their entitlement. And as I indicated previously, they're proposing a lot more than what the town required.
Would that, would that come before a town council meeting, a public meeting then?
Correct, yes. So, and then there were some other questions. Let's see, the definition of floor space. Yes,
Hold on, I'm not done with this one yet.
Okay.
Michelle, did you have another question there?
So I just had a question. So there's a Was there a condition of approval that required accessibility?
No. We didn't, I don't believe so, although I think it was discussed.
They have accessible units.
No, accessibility
space.
to the open space ribbon that was around it. It kind of felt like a little bait and switch. And not that I think they intended it at all, but, because we were talking about the little ribbon and where's the access and could we get public entry through the middle? Because right now, the way that property is, you can go through the middle. And because we got all excited that both parcels were going to be donated and, there wouldn't be these issues, presumably, because you could come down from the top to access off the ridge. Now, I think the question is, it's just kind of a question mark in my head.
I guess it would be good to have the Open Space Committee involved in that as well, and the town council, when this goes before them with questions like that, might want to get some input from the Open Space Committee. Just a thought.
Well, it is on the open space inventory, this whole thing, and they had a role. But okay, let's go on to the other one unless we want to noodle this one anymore. Okay, next.
Okay, the definition of floor space with respect to ADUs, after consulting with Fairfax Council, a determination was made that the definition in the ADU ordinance needs to be standalone, that there was really no good way to integrate that into any town definition. So the state, in its wisdom, determined that they want to come up with their own unique definition, and we're simply going to have to leave it as such. There's nothing that staff was able to define in any state codes that further define that, and I believe Commissioner Swift spent some time attempting to find if it was further defined. It isn't. This is just the state coming up with its own unique language and saying, deal with it, local jurisdictions. So we're just saying it's its own language.
I guess the question was, it isn't defined. So if it's not defined, why is it there in our code?
Because it's in the state statute.
Do we have the discretion to say that it's the same or equal to floor area?
I spent some time trying to reconcile it because obviously you don't want to have, if it's this part of the house, it's this definition. And if it's that part of the house, it's that definition. I mean, you can go nuts coming up with, the same, defining it differently and raising that question, and it's not defined. You can't do it. You just can't do it. It just raises as many issues as it would answer. So the idea is, I think you just kind of go on a common sense perspective, whatever that means. But yeah, the problem is that when they start getting into the micro detail, they're not really equipped to do that well, and so they'll come up with these terms, and nobody's going, well, what the heck does that mean? So, and even if somebody asked the question, I question whether or not they'd really have an answer that would work for all cases. So we're just going to roll with it. I will say this, that most people who are doing ADUs, they have a pretty good idea of what floor area is. They look at our code and they go, okay, if it's standalone, it's exterior wall to exterior wall. Another aspect is that under the state code, most of the ADUs that were being requested are below what somebody in theory could do. So, we're pretty happy that we're processing a lot of ADUs in town these days. Literally more in a 1 month period than we've done in prior multiple years. So it's people, the word is out, people are applying, it's going forward. Parkade rehabilitation, the big challenge there is money. That there's such a nominal amount of money available. I think it's in the $300,000 range. That most of what we're talking about is restriping and doing that. In the fullness of time, sure, we'd like to come up with a more comprehensive vision for doing that area. But when you're talking about physical improvements in public spaces, $300,000 is just finger counting money. So that's what went to the council, and that's what they're working on. And then there was a question, the last one was outdoor, or I'm sorry, scribbled.
Outdoor music at Mas Masa.
Oh, yes. And Linda, check that out.
So I had to write 3 letters to 3 different businesses reminding them of their conditions of approval. So I'll be honest that I don't remember exactly what Mas Masas were, but they were violating them. They're supposed to have only acoustic music, and the letters went out, and I sent them certified. I got a signature back from Mas Masa maybe 2 days ago, and nobody has called me. But I'm assuming they know and they're going to comply, but there is a resident that will make sure that we know if they violate their conditions again. They had amplified music outside, and I don't think they were beyond their hours, but they had amplified music and they're not supposed to.
You said you had 3 businesses that you
Yes,
wrote
I
these
had to
letters
write a
for?
letter to the barbecue place that I can never remember the name of it.
The station, the Way?
Thank you.
No.
The Way Station, and then also to 19 Broadway.
What was the way station doing? And
They went, their hours are supposed to stop at 2 o'clock at 1 o'clock on Sundays, and they played until 2. No, from 11 to 2 in the middle of the day on Sunday. They're supposed to stop at 1. They're supposed to go from 11 to 1, and they went till 2. Yeah.
Thank you.
Caterpillar?
Caterpillar, as you were aware, they came in with a expanded application. They, to date, have not been able to secure the necessary circulation improvements to meet, I think it's fire department requirements. As a result, their project and all attached conditions and improvements have been on hold. Staff has reached out to San Anselmo to see if they might be willing to consider reinterpreting their requirements. It basically is a pretty typical interpretation which says you can't have accessory uses to a primary use that doesn't exist in San Anselmo. This is part of the tricky part. And that the accessory use would be considered something that they wouldn't normally allow. So they're stuck. We would love to get past that impasse, but that's where it stands.
But wasn't the issue the noise along the one property side with the teachers and the residents?
That was the issue that the neighbor brought up again when they asked for a modification of their use permit to start using the back building. They aren't using that building. So they're operating under their original use permit, and they can't get the fire trucks close enough to the back building to meet fire regulations, fighting regulations, and so they can't comply, so they can't activate their use permit. They can't modify that building and make it into daycare. They already had approval to use the back area as a playground with the original use permit to use the front building. So
does that mean then?
those requirements for the buffer, landscaping buffer and stuff, those are not going to happen because they are not able to use the barn.
It also means the playground is still by the fence under the neighbor's kitchen. But he has not been complaining?
Oh, yes, he has. Yeah, he came in and he's talked to Mimi. I spent a long time talking to him, explaining to him that those children I encouraged him to get noise meter readings, but I told him they're probably not violating the noise ordinance. And so they have a use permit to be there. he could try to request that the use permit be revisited, but he is one person. It's not like we're getting complaints from 5 neighbors out there.
Can I ask about the fire department requirement? Are they being required to provide fire sprinklers, or would that have mitigated the access?
So I can't claim to be an expert on the fire department. I thought the building already had to be sprinklered, but they have, because it's a school and it's going to have children, they have to be able to get the trucks a certain distance from the building, and they have to be able to sit there and fight the fire, and they just can't do it. They can't get there from the street in the back. It's not close enough to get the hoses. And they don't have enough room on the side of the building that's in Fairfax in the front. And San Anselmo, because of their regulations, won't allow them to pave and create an area for the fire trucks. And so if they park on Sir Francis Drake, they're still too far away from that barn in the middle. They can't meet the requirements.
Is that impacting at all the place next to it, the old hair salon or is that?
No, because their building's right up at the street.
Right, but I mean, I haven't seen too much going on there as well, or the fence between the two, so I just didn't know if it impacted them or at all.
If
What is
fire response was, if they're having trouble meeting their fire regulations?
No, not the fire, just because I haven't seen any movement there. So I didn't know if the issues with Caterpillar Academy and their not being able to move forward
Is fire related?
was going to impact the other business, but it doesn't sound like it. They may just be on their own timeline. Okay.
Yeah, but they are having issues with fire, because I talked to fire about that building too. And right now they're trying to make the argument that they are a historic building, so that they only have to put in a residential fire sprinkler system, and they don't have to make exiting door width changes. And so our building department and our fire department are talking to the hair salon about trying to work it out with them, so that they are stalled. Okay. Dealing with the fire department.
Okay, so at the risk of keeping you guys here longer, I do want to comment on the work program items a little bit. My first question is, what are our priorities? I tried to follow as much of the cannabis meeting last night as I could. And I recommend it for anyone who was not able to listen to it last night to watch it when the tape comes up, but maybe it's already up, I don't know. It sounded to me that there was some discussion of timing towards the end of the meeting that I may have missed all the conversation. But, you know, with respect to the things that are doable, that are on our plate, and the things that are sort of floating up to the top here, what I was hearing was cannabis, objective design review guidelines, and maybe streamlining some things to make life a little bit more easy, those 6 bullets. Is that what you think we're sort of going to be focusing on in the short term? I mean, I heard you say you're going to come back to us with a more detailed analysis of the cannabis options. It sounds like obviously we're doing work to get some information about the objective design review criteria, and we're going to talk to Cassidy about that. So is that sort of the big push? Are those 2 things, or am I missing in the inclusionary zoning or whatever? I mean, it sounded to me like it's cannabis, objective design review, and maybe 6 things that we can streamline life with.
Well, the one thing I would add is that when Marinda Heights gets going, that's going to probably trump a lot of this, simply because you're dealing with permit streamlining and lining up consultants and things like that, and it's a big deal project. So And so that's going to be very time sensitive. With that caveat, I would agree with your analysis.
And frankly, what I was sort of hearing, and I kept nodding off and waking up and listening again, but it sounds like cannabis is number one at this point. Is that right?
I think we're going to have to sit down at a staff level. I haven't even had a chance to talk to the town manager today about that. I would probably look to him for some guidance in terms of where the actual priorities are. It's just a question of syncing up resources and priorities.
I guess I heard a sense of urgency from the council when I was listening. Maybe I was imagining it.
Well, and that was one of my other questions for you, because I finished it today, listening to it. Did you think that we would be getting cannabis at our September meeting to start working on? It almost sounded that way, but I wasn't sure from listening to the council meeting.
There's a lot of work attendant to cannabis regulations. I would probably say that we will get the commission will get an overview at a minimum, kind of fleshing it out. But in terms of, and probably a description of a work program, beyond that, like I said, we're 20 hours a week down on staff resources. So I'm doing project planning right now. Those have PSA deadlines, so you don't get to skip those. So we're moving forward as quickly as we can, but when you distribute 20 hours a week of work, it makes it a little bit more difficult to say, oh yes, I'm going to be working on this and we'll present that. We'll do the best we can and hope to be able to present those type of items. I think the objective development standards really needs to go apace with the cannabis.
Through the chair, are we on a time frame on the cannabis? Do we have to respond within a certain time frame to the state, or what is the?
Well, interestingly, we have a moratorium, a one-year moratorium that's going to expire October 31st, which can be extended for another year. So almost certainly we'll probably need to do that. It's just a question of syncing up resources and trying to be realistic. I mean, it'd be easy to say, oh, sure, we'll take care of all that, and then significantly underperform. One of the highest priorities is trying to get some additional resources, staffing resources available to mainly assist Linda, but also, free up some room so that we can do some of this more ordinance-based work or longer-term planning work.
Okay, I had two more items. So on the maximum house size, you're going to provide something to the council, or are we going to see that before it goes forward?
Not unless there's another planning commission meeting. I intend to take that to the council at their next meeting in September.
Then my last comment was kind of like on a different area. We talked a little bit today about lot coverage with some of our applications. So in looking at the applications and trying to figure out lot coverage on some of the applications, I went back to what we have as the definition of lot coverage. And what our definition says is the percentage of the lot area that is occupied by the ground area of a building, any accessory buildings, as well as any impervious surface areas such as patios other than the driveway, adjacent to the building or accessory building. So the concern that I have is that word adjacent in there, which to me, if I looked at, we had an application today that had a small freestanding concrete pad on it. If we had a large property that had a house on one side and had a freestanding impervious picnic area or barbecue area at the other end of the property, when I look at this definition and it says adjacent to the building or accessory buildings, that definition to me says I can't capture that impervious surface that is not adjacent to the building. I don't think that might have been the intent of that definition, but I would like, and I think it can be important as we look perhaps at, developments or changes where there is a large space, a large lot, that we might want to go back and look at that, and if that wasn't the intent, find out what the intent was, which I would think would be to minimize impervious surfaces on a lot, to go ahead and maybe change that language. And if we're can't find what the intent was, maybe that would be something that we could discuss to see what the Planning Commission's thoughts are on that definition and whether we want to pursue changing it, which I would think wouldn't be that difficult an item. But I just bring that up because, the way I see that and the definition of that with the word adjacent, I'm not sure that was what the intent is.
I'm wondering if we didn't somewhat start that discussion already in looking at limitations to housing sizes, and I think that could be a part of that, kind of worked into that discussion, but
I have a few concerns about you taking that house size thing to the council without us having further discussion, because we did have some discussion when we talked about it, about, Michelle, the sort of idea that if somebody wants to exceed a certain size, they would improve the energy efficiency as sort of a tit for tat, and change as well the percentage of the remodeling that would have to trigger the requirement to come back in for the existing large homes if they were improving to increase energy efficiency and things like that. And I want to make sure that that those thoughts come back to us, or at least we talk about them here right now, because I really like those ideas. I think Phil really liked those ideas, and I think you and Michelle talked a little bit about those after that meeting.
Yes, and I actually am prepared to discuss that. I was intending to do so. It just wasn't sinking in with the rest of the discussion. But as your commission notes, the direction from the commission was obviously, there's no consensus about the maximum size. There's a series of options. Those options will be presented to the council. The consensus item, the big one, was the 120 square foot, no plumbing, no electrical shed, not be considered as part of the square footage. I did indeed meet with Commissioner Rodriguez. It was a very fruitful meeting. I would laud her efforts, not in her current capacity, but as a planner for the County of Marin, where she was instrumental in developing the Marin County Green Building Checklist, single-family residential new construction requirements. And what this basically does, this is right here, see, there we go, I'm going to, if they can zoom in, is what it does is it says the larger the structure, the more heightened the requirements for energy efficiency that are necessary. And so there's three different steps, and it basically says, yeah, if you want to build a larger home, you have to document that it's going to use less energy. And so, for example, well, let me see this. Okay, so 4,000 square feet, it has to be 15% more efficient than the state energy code. If it's going to be more than 4,000 square feet, one of the options is that it be 35% more efficient than the state energy code. Commissioner Gonzalez-Parber also pointed out another county requirement, and boy, this was deep. I gave it to our building official to look at it, but one of the challenges is that you can get really, really detailed, and the county has a full-time person that looks at projects just to evaluate these criteria that they've come up with. It's page after page. This is probably a little bit more Fairfax scale because it's basically one page and it's understandable, but this is the type of concept that we could certainly bring forward. I mean, that seemed to be conceptually, the commission was agreeable to that. The question was dropping the 10% bonus floor area, but still keeping some requirement for building technology and energy efficiency and things like that. So, if the commission wants to take another dip at it, we could schedule this for the next meeting and do it again. I'm not sure if we're going to make a lot of progress on the non-consensus areas, but if we wanted to focus in on what the commission might be recommending in terms of energy efficiency requirements and modifications to that, we could do that.
Those sound like good ideas that that you and Commissioner Rodriguez came up with. I think what I hear the chair and Commissioner Swift saying, and I'm kind of leaning in that direction, is that we didn't have the opportunity to discuss the specifics. It might be nice to take a look at that before it goes to council.
Well, I guess my thinking on that is I know when we had the last time we discussed this and we had the staff report, there was language in there about that there were consensus among the commission on certain items. And I made the comment that there wasn't consensus on items. And I just, and one of the things that council could do, and it would be good for them to do when they do get this, is to go back and, like we do with council meetings, view the planning commission meetings when we had the public come and speak and in our discussions on this. I just want kind of those types of things, the lack of consensus on a lot of this from the commission kind of made clear to the council, plus the fact that anything we do go to, be it something like you were discussing, then becomes a work effort in and of itself to look at it at some point in time too. But that's why I just thought it would be good to kind of see what was going forward. But
I agree. I watched the meeting on video, and it seems like there were a lot of good thoughts out there. But I think it would be a good idea to see the product of that consensus or lack of, to see where there are still different opinions and why. Like one of the things we were talking about, maximum floor area, you're saying that anything under, what was it, 120 square feet would not be counted, but then does that mean that you can put up 10 chicken coops, or were we going to limit the number of accessory unconditioned spaces? So I didn't really hear that.
Yeah, I think we did, that question came up at the last meeting, and the determination would be there would be one. And maybe I'm inventing a consensus.
No, I think I heard something like that, but it almost sounded just like an idea. I don't know that there really was consensus on what that space would be, how to define that space. So I don't know, maybe it was a consensus on just one accessory.
But so I'm hearing all of you saying you want to see it, so.
Well, I wasn't actually saying,
Oh, okay.
what I was saying was if we can't talk about it here, right now at 10 minutes to 10 o'clock, because we're here, we can talk about whether we want to see it. I don't necessarily want to. I want it to go to the council in a timely way, but at the same time, I want it to go in a tight way. Because we all, and I saw this again last night at the cannabis meeting, it's like, you talk to us for too long about one direction and we change our minds and go that direction, then we go back this way. And, I don't want to give them something where it's like, well, the 7 commissioners had 7 different opinions and here are your 7 different options. You know what I mean? And I don't think that's what you're talking about. But there's an element here of a part of the big picture that you guys went out and kind of further honed, and we haven't necessarily weighed in as fully as we might. And so I'm just wondering if it's worth sort of, obviously there's only 5 of us here, but is it worth sort of testing ourselves again and saying, where are we still pretty much not in agreement, or are we all thinking that or some of us thinking, at least those of us are here, thinking that maybe this concept of restrictions on size coupled with energy efficiency for larger structures is worth continuing to discuss for the next, 10 minutes or so. I mean, the other issue is that both Commissioner Caroline, I think, and Commissioner Green may have also been, I can't remember where Commissioner Green was on the limiting the maximum home size, but I know that Commissioner Caroline wasn't supportive of the idea.
Well, I would say this, that much as a comment was made at the council last night about the point of diminishing returns, it would be great if we could try to clarify with your commission tonight, maybe on the topic of, with energy efficiency and the technology, do we feel that there should be a requirement attended on larger homes to have heightened energy efficiency? I could bring this up for the commission to look at.
I imagine the answer is yes, generally speaking, but
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about specifically.
Right. But the other challenge is that, as you know, this was not something that originated with the Planning Commission, it was the council. And so the question is do we want to take this back for further future discussion, given that there's been a lot of attempts to address the big picture items like maximum home size and how we approach that. And it seemed clear that there was no consensus on that aspect. And so is it time to say, okay, council, this is as far as we got, at the risk of misstating the commission's position, and I will certainly attempt to do my best. It's kind of their idea and their desire, and perhaps getting that to them sooner rather than later would be helpful, because if we are talking about ordinance, it's going to come back to the Planning Commission anyway, and so maybe they come back and they say, well, Planning Commission, we want you to look at this and this and this some more with this direction, which would help you all figure out, okay, we really are talking about a maximum home size reduction. That's just an example, which is the kind of consensus direction that perhaps they could provide on the fundamental question about a reduction in maximum home size that this group, at the risk of misstating, isn't going to get to. So that's the big question. And in terms of this item about, again, looping back to, do we want to continue to provide a square footage bonus, or has the technology caught up? Just for staff's 2 cents worth, I think that the impetus towards allowing extra square footage for technology, I know that there's technology that goes beyond what the state codes require, but I can also, without a doubt, say that the state codes are extremely comprehensive, and that they seem to add to it every year. I would defer to Commissioner Gonzalez-Parber, but my understanding is that new homes are now required to have solar. That's the latest requirement. So again, you could ask the question, if that's the case, are there a lot of properties in Fairfax that warrant solar? I mean, if you've got a north aspect in the woods, that's an example of, yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you because I feel like you went off on a tangent that I wasn't focused on, okay? I'm focused on the house size. I'm talking about the house size. I'm not talking about letting go of the bonus for the, solar, because that was a different issue. What I'm talking about is the house size, the maximum house size, right? And we didn't have consensus. Am I crazy, or that's what we were talking about? Okay, so we didn't have consensus. We had a broad range of views about what to do about the council's direction to us to try and figure out what to do about maximum house size. In the very last few minutes of that discussion, Michelle, threw a brilliant little hand grenade of information to us about another option that you guys have further honed. And I thought what we were talking about is you going to the town council to talk about what they want us to do about maximum house size, given the input we got from the public and where most of the council members came out on that issue. Are you and I on the same page, Ben?
Yes.
Okay, so in terms of that, can I just ask each of the council members what their feelings are? Council members. Yeah, I'm going to promote you all to council. Each of the commissioners, whether you have, whether you are intrigued, interested, leaning in a particular direction with respect to the idea that we tie maximum house size in Fairfax to certain energy efficiency standards that are more stringent than would otherwise be required by the state.
If you were to ask me that, now I don't have enough information or background to give an answer on that. I go back to kind of my original answer saying that I don't think we should change the maximum house size. But as far as a concept of tying house size to the energy efficiency, I can't give you an answer tonight.
Okay.
I would say yes.
Yes.
Tying maximum green efficiency to house sizes beyond a certain point, or even under a certain level.
Yes, I would agree.
And I very much like this
Yes.
format and checkoff sheet.
Yeah, I would agree. And actually, San Anselmo has something that breaks it down even more. There are certain thresholds for like 1,000 square feet. And, up to, we could say, at every increment up to 5,000 square feet, these are the requirements. San Anselmo also has a dollar figure associated with that square footage, so you can say 1,000 square feet or project valuation of whatever you want to say, $100,000. So with every, that's kind of unfair because the market is so lopsided right now. But I think having increments, up to 5,000 square feet, I think is a good idea, because then it incentivizes people to do better, but it does kind of set a cap to where we, once thought was a good limit.
Okay, I'm going to jump in real quickly because this is not on the agenda, and I'm concerned that we're not providing adequate public notice. It seems like there's a desire by the commission to look at this conceptually, and what I would recommend then is we schedule this for the next planning commission meeting and duly notice it, and provide the type of analysis, look at other jurisdictions, look at the county in greater detail. Perhaps work with Commissioner Gonzalez again on refining what that means, because she's an expert in that, and then present that to the commission, because I'm just concerned that we're getting into an area where it's into the details, and I don't know enough about the Brown Act to know whether that's copacetic to do, but I'm worried.
Also, through the chair, I had recommended that we look at the new county green building ordinance, which has requirements for infrastructure for charging stations for electric vehicles in properties of different sizes, and I think that's something that could be added to the checklist.
Commissioner Gonzalez, did you have, Gonzalez, I know, I'm so sorry. It's late. Okay. Commissioner Rodriguez, did you have anything else you wanted to add on this question? No. Well, at the risk of keeping on going, I guess I think it is important that you maybe bring it back to us. I want to make sure that what we get to the town council is as clear as we can get it. So, yeah, it probably is a good idea to bring it back to us one more time. I don't really know where it fits in terms of the town council's priorities, given what we've just said about cannabis and, you know, objective design guidelines and stuff. So, I think it would be good. I have concerns whenever we come across fixes to our code, even if they're really appropriate, because it's just kind of piling another straw onto the camel's back sometimes, even though I think there are some things that are important, especially if we're looking at objective design guidelines. And so to the extent that we are looking holistically at definitions, I was just, you know, it's just like, Cindy, I'm looking at you because of the one you pointed out earlier that, you know, it's obviously a good idea to be more precise in our terms and use them in ways that, you know, are defensible later. And but I just have concerns about trying to fit all these things into the overall workload and actually getting things done, because I know the wall property is going to be taking up so much of your time. I want to figure out ways to make this workload move a little bit more smoothly. I feel strongly that we do not have to recreate the wheel when it comes to identifying objective, concrete, measurable standards for design, because we have a lot of this stuff spelled out in excruciating detail in our general plan already. And when I go through the land use element of our general plan, I come across time after time again the definition of what makes Fairfax Fairfax. And we come across in the descriptions, you know, at every, I mean, I've just been going through this thing and highlighting all the pages where we can pull out, you know, measurable standards. So I don't think that we necessarily need to look to others. We need to look to ourselves. We've already done a lot of this work. And I even went back and pulled out my old general plan implementation committee matrix that we had worked on at our retreat, and I went through and started, highlighting the ones that seem like, oh, here, look at what this says. Develop this design guideline. It almost spells it out for us, and it's like low-hanging fruit to some extent. Now, some of these things are not easily turned into an objective design review guideline or standard. They will take some time. And we even heard, like one of them is the visual resources map. We have a visual resources map. It's not a measurable with a ruler side yard setback thing, but it's a map. It has an outline. It has a concrete place. It says these areas are visually important and distinctive because of where they're located and where you can see them. And so I want to go through our general plan, and I want to pull out Fairfax's objective criteria out of this general plan. And I don't care if we do it looking at the general plan implementation Excel spreadsheet, or if we just pick the land use element, and I can sit down with you guys and go through what I think, comes out of this. There's a couple of other things I want to point out too. We have a lot of maps in the general plan that have very specific land areas that are identified. I think we can tie a lot of those specific maps to specific areas and specific neighborhood characteristics. And that's what the land use element talks about. It talks about little separate neighborhoods that are sort of unique unto themselves. And I think that we can, it's not like you just, change a word here or there in our ordinances and you're going to create design, objective design review guidelines. I think what you're going to have to do is do some work. What are the neighborhoods that have a distinctive personality, both theme? What are the neighborhoods that have characteristics that go a certain way? Obviously, tying all this into the historic inventory is going to be important, but that's also all stuff that's spelled out in detail in the general plan. There's other historical stuff we've done. For example, we were one of the few municipalities in Marin, just us and Novato, from what I can tell, that have formally identified priority conservation areas with the ABAG in the Plan Bay area. So there, we went to a lot of effort to submit and then got approved for 3 separate priority conservation areas. The town council didn't want to be so specific that it was parcel by parcel what these areas are. But I think we've got a Zone 1, which is Western Fairfax, Tamarancho, Cascade. We've got a Zone 2, which is Southern Fairfax and Bald Hill. And we've got a Zone 3, which is Northern Fairfax, Sleepy Hollow, Oak Manor, and the Wall property. All of those have been formally identified by the town as conservation area, priority conservation areas. Yes. And so these, if we're setting up guidelines that are objective, I think we should look at geographic areas. I think we should think about some of the things in the land use element are about looking outside the boundary of the town for buffer zoning outside in the planning area. Again, I think we got to go through this land use element and we've got to take it systematically and we've got to figure out which of these things are already expressed as how we're going to approach these problems.
One caveat I would offer, those are great suggestions, and obviously what we have is going to be the best fit for the community to the extent that we can modify it to something that a person of average intelligence can understand. closely tied to that is sort of a risk-reward aspect to it, where there are properties or areas in town that are vulnerable for various reasons. And whereas, a Bethune neighborhood, might be really good to say what's unique about that area, if there aren't larger parcels or a parcel at least of vulnerable, larger area of land, that's probably not something that would be a highest priority to try to tackle at this time. So we need to put that through that filter because, for example, we're coming back to the Planning Commission to talk about maximum house size at the next meeting. So you were asking earlier, well, when are we going to see progress on these other items? Well, those other items are going to be accompanied with looking again at house size again. So you have to look at that risk reward. You have to look at what's going to get you to where you need to go based on a pretty careful assessment of vulnerabilities. I don't know if the best place to do that is with the entire commission sitting there. I might suggest putting together a subcommittee and sitting down and having that meeting with an ad hoc committee, quorum sized, and just kind of going through properties, the 319 programs, the land use element, the various documents. Commissioner Newton, you provided something dealing with criteria for protecting open space, which has aspects that could be applied towards objective criteria. So those are all things that, would be good to apply. Sorry for jumping in, but
I would just like to comment that I strongly would prefer a review of our actual general plan rather than the 300-page spreadsheet of stuff, tasks that are somewhat irrelevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think you'd have to organize it by the ones that actually referred to design review, and it's an Excel spreadsheet that you can sort of manipulate to be more helpful. But from my perspective, I hate Excel, so from my perspective, my personality, I much prefer the text and the prose and but I will point out that for those that like sort of the data maneuverability of the Excel spreadsheet, and it's just, I think, a personality thing, that some people like it the other way. The other thing I was going to say about the Open Space Committee is, in terms of that tree committee thing, where we were talking about getting the input of the tree committee, we already did that after the general plan was developed with respect to the Open Space Committee providing reports on parcels on the open space inventory. It was added, I believe, as part of the procedures that you don't have to look to anybody else. Again, you just pick up what we said about getting applications to the Open Space Committee, and the Open Space Committee needing to submit a report so that it could be included in the staff report to the commission when the application came to the commission. So when we review applications that are dealing with parcels on the open space inventory, it's supposed to include the Open Space Committee's recommendations as part of the package that we're reviewing. And I would think that with the tree committee, it would simply be a very simple thing to take what we already did for open space and just write tree committee and put something together that was pretty cookie cutter.
Through the chair, what are we talking about now?
I'm jumping around. The tree committee.
No, I understand the whole thing. I agree with you on the tree committee. You've got the procedures. You could just change the name, send it out. But what agenda item are we on? What is
This is still the planning director's. No, we have not gotten the reports. I am questioning the planning director about his report. I'm dragging it out.
Well, no, 2 nights in a row. Actually, this is very helpful because obviously heretofore the objective development standards has been considered kind of job number one among the major priorities that we're not, just obligated by deadlines, streamlining deadlines, or streamlining act deadlines. But so to the extent that you're bringing in relevant factors that should be considered in developing those, that's very much appreciated. Let's see, in terms of the tree committee and stuff like that, yeah, that's not going to be a problem. I think we already added the tree committee to our transmittal checklist. We're obviously to provide the planning commission with that specific authority to make that final determination will require a zoning ordinance change. But in terms of saying, hey, tree committee, take a look at this now. And, the planning commission is making decisions every meeting on projects, so we'll have the benefit of their recommendations. It's just that if there's trees that are to be removed, it still has to go back to the tree committee until or unless we modify the zoning or the code. It's not the zoning ordinance necessarily. I think that's a different chapter. It's chapter 8, I believe.
And I apologize for kind of jumping around. I got my notes are all over the place here. The one other thing I just want to ask is following up on your suggestion that we create an ad hoc group or a subcommittee to look further at, what was it?
Objective development standards.
Objective development standards. Are there any commissioners who have a burning desire to jump up and take that one by the horns?
I don't know that I'll volunteer for that right now, but I think that would be a good opportunity to bring Cassidy into that ad hoc group as a way to start looking at, I'm sure she can provide us with a format for review of historical structures that would then provide us with a graphic image rather than just a paragraph about the type of architecture, but we could begin to develop actual forms, graphic photos and forms about historic character, and then we might do the same in going through our general plan in that fashion.
Is this something you want to see if, because we're 2 commissioners short tonight, that there may be interest from those as well?
Yeah, maybe we can agendize that subcommittee for the next meeting as well. All right, I think that's probably it for my questions on your report, so we have minutes. I had no comments on these minutes.
I have 2 changes. On page 3, under Commissioner Rodriguez, the last bullet should read, she would recommend denial as the project does not meet the findings of approval, instead of, and that they go back to the pre-illegal construction.
I'm sorry, could you say that she would recommend denial and?
Denial as the project does not meet the findings for approval. And then on page 7, Commissioner Rodriguez, 4th bullet down. This is where I was making my recommendation on the maximum house size, and I was saying 3,000 square feet maximum. And then I said, but they could achieve an exception. So I was saying anything above that, above 3,000, that's the bullet above, would require installation of energy efficiency measures can't read my writing. And that for house size, oh God, the exception, that the maximum would be 4,000 square feet. Oh, yes, that they could go up to 4,000 square feet maximum if they installed energy efficiency measures, proving that the energy use was not greater than 3,000, is what I said. So it would say anything, I don't know how to even write that.
Oh, that sounds right. Was not greater than the energy,
So they could go up to 4,000 square feet maximum, as long as the energy,
That of a 3,000 square foot house.
thank you.
Yeah, I believe I have it.
Yeah.
any other comments, questions, concerns? Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of July 19th with the changes stated.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Any opposed? And so that's approved by Commissioner Fregosa, Commissioner Rodriguez, Commissioner Swift, Commissioner Newton, and abstained by Commissioner Gonzalez-Parber. And, okay, so now Commissioner comments and requests.
I would just like an update on the Java Hut. I saw that it's operating,
Excuse me, I didn't get
the Java Hut, the
Java.
cafe, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I saw that they're operating now. Are they fully
yes.
occupied and
Yes, they've got
operational?
the chains up, or at least when we've gone by at the appropriate times, the chains have been up, and there's a sign directing people to the bathrooms, things like that.
Bathrooms are they using?
The ones in the Good Earth.
Anything else? Wow, it's not even midnight. All right, we're adjourned.
Just one more thing.
Oh.
If you guys have a sense of, over the next few months, if you know of something that's coming forward, or, I don't know, is some kind of projected agenda for what we can look at, but
You mean like projects or stuff? Or-
projects that would be coming to us that you know are coming forward.
You know, it's really hard to judge because they're incomplete till they give us something, and we never know when they're going to give us that stuff.
And then once they give us something, we have to get it on the agenda pretty quickly, so, yeah.
Yeah, we're adjourned.